Does it make perfect sense for a business leader to be irrationally hopeful? Well, there's at least one PhD from Hofstra in New York, now located in Denver, that thinks that is the absolutely best mindset to have through the course of these exceptional times. We say hello to Dr. Gustavo Grodnitsky, all the way from Denver, graduated Hofstra. And tell us, first of all, Gustavo, about this idea about being irrationally hopeful for any business leader who's joining us and watching right now.
First, great to be with you, Gare. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with you. So, irrationally hopeful is just one of the three behaviors I suggest that leaders during this crisis must display in order to offer clarity and security to their employees. The trifecta, as it were, of leadership behaviors are about being informed, being composed, and being irrationally hopeful. So if I can take the three, informed simply means there is a lot of disinformation and misinformation that's available out there in the media and social media, et cetera. I urge leaders, please do not be a vector for disinformation or misinformation. If you hear something you believe in social media, please validate it, verify it, corroborate it with some trusted, reliable source. So being informed simply means make sure that you are someone who's sharing real information, not altered in some way. Composed means during this crisis, you will find people get stuck emotionally. They will get, if you go back to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, originally 5, they're now updated to 7. So they will get this, of her 7 stages of grief, people will get stuck in being in shock, in denial and anger. Getting unstuck is part of being composed, is getting unstuck. So people don't want to follow somebody who's angry. They may have to follow you because you're their boss, but they don't want to. People want to follow people who are assertive and calm. Finally, being irrationally hopeful. I think that is a key component of leadership through this time because, to use a metaphor here, if you are dropped into the middle of a jungle and you're looking around and there is no clear path, if you want to make it back to civilization, you're going to have to make one. You're going to have to carve a path out of the jungle. And this pandemic is a little bit like that, in that it is unprecedented for anyone who's been alive, who is currently alive. And it's a little bit like being dropped in the middle of the jungle means we are going to see obstacles we have never seen before. We're going to see obstacles we have never faced before. And in that jungle means we're going to have to find ways to move over, under, around, or through those obstacles. That requires being irrationally hopeful. And just to be clear, irrational does not mean we ignore the data. Irrational means we use the data. And even if we don't have an answer in the moment, we use the data to say, oh, here's the data we will use in order to find an answer. We may not have it now, but we will find an answer. We may not have the path out now, but we will carve a path out using this data. That requires being irrationally hopeful.
You know, one of the things, I've been following your work for a while, Gustavo, and you're very well known for being one of North America's foremost authorities on how culture really trumps everything. And you've written a book about that. And
Thank you.
we got reconnected because you did a webinar for Tech Canada the other day. And I listened to that and I thought I had to have you on to talk about the profit paradox, because so many business leaders right now are into short-term emergency thinking, which is totally understandable. I'm always thinking about, well, what comes out the other side? And when I heard you speak about the profit paradox, I thought that was something that anyone watching could benefit from. And as you explain it, it's this conflict, and now everything is happening now so fast. But it's a good time to rethink classic capitalism versus social capitalism. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. So first, let's start with the profit paradox. Okay, the profit paradox says companies that pursue profit directly make less profit. Companies that pursue culture first make more profit. That's the paradox. So the fundamentals, the foundation of that comes from exactly what you just identified. the comparison between classic capitalism and social capitalism. So the term classic capitalism comes from a book called Wealth of Nations, written by Adam Smith, published in 1776. To be clear, I just said 1776, not 1976, all right? We're talking about a model that's been around for 240 years. The term social capitalism in the literature is synonymous with two other terms your viewers may have heard. One is called conscious capitalism, the other is called conscious business. So these are three terms published in three different books coming out for the first time in 2006. So we're talking about a model that's only been codified in just over a dozen years. So the concept, the key components, if we bring these down to their fundamentals, the two fundamentals of classic capitalism is, number one, decision-making is made by owners and investors, otherwise shareholders, or determined by shareholders. So number one, decision-making made for and by shareholders. Number two, the goal of classic capitalism companies is always to optimize profit. Optimize profit is about making the most profit in the shortest period of time. Social capitalism, and I want to be clear, not socialism, not social engineering, social capitalism. The term social is used like social media and social networking. It's about leveraging primary human drives to connect and belong, to drive behavior and performance. That's how the term social is used, okay? We're not talking politics, social capitalism. So social capitalism has three underlying premises. Number one, you must balance the needs of all stakeholders. Stakeholders, anyone who comes to contact with your product or service. Number two, no one stakeholder should profit at the expense of another. So you don't play stakeholders against each other. Number three, social capital companies are always trying to optimize profit, not maximize. Optimize profit, which means social capital companies are willing to reinvest profit even during a crisis for the long-term benefit of stakeholders and the company.
Now I'm going to throw you a high, hard one.
Go ahead.
Big fastball coming at you, Gustavo.
Go ahead, I'm getting ready.
One of the things I loved about your talk on the Tech Canada webinar was you illustrated the difference in these philosophies, as in the good to great thinking from Jim Collins versus another book called Firms of Endearment. It's classic capitalism versus social capitalism. How can you summarize those two books and what it all means for someone who's, let's say, running a physiotherapy clinic out in North Vancouver, or a storage container company, or a used car dealership, small to medium-sized business owners that don't rely or can't depend so much on academia, but need clear answers and clear direction?
Right. So first, yeah, in my book, Culture Trumps Everything, I use these two books as the models. Good to Great representing classic capitalism, Firms of Endearment representing social capitalism. Specifically now, with all due respect to Jim Collins, and he and I have shared a platform before, Good to Great is always looking at their outcome measure is return to investor, which is actually return to investor, which is a shareholder, okay? And that is a fundamental of classic capitalism. Firms of Endearment is always talking about stakeholders, not just shareholders. So that's why I use these two books as the fundamentals underpinnings. And what I have in my book and in the presentation you saw is the financial consequences of choosing each one of these as a model. Again, classic capitalism companies are focused on profit first. Social capitalism companies are focused on culture first, and profit follows. So let's talk about the small businesses you just mentioned, small to medium-sized businesses, which is really the heart of kind of why I do the work I do, the heart of my own business. During periods of crisis, leaders experience fear. And it's often around a fear of survival. So they will often turn to a classic capital model of hoarding cash in order to survive. And what I show in the data is that when you do that as a classic capitalism company, you not only miss the turnaround, the recovery, but you suffer long-term, because social capital companies outperform classic capital companies. So when I talked about small business leaders, small to medium business leaders, I talk about social capitalism as requiring courageous leadership. And courage is not about the absence of fear. Courage is the mastery of fear. And there are a couple of ways for us to master that fear. One of them is to move towards classic capitalism because it always feels good to hoard cash during a crisis. The other is to thoroughly understand social capitalism. Because when we look at and take care of all stakeholders, when we invest for the long-term benefit of our organization, then everybody in our ecosystem benefits.
So you and I could, because we're both, I think management consulting geeks, and we just love this stuff.
Yeah.
But if I was to put you on the spot right now, because as you know, these are unedited, unscripted conversations, Gustavo. Yeah. I call it the better, bolder question. What is right now, for anyone watching, the better, bolder question they need to be asking? I mean, you wrote a great book called Culture Trumps Everything. You've got a PhD from Hofstra. Arguably, you're the second most famous person out of Hofstra other than Wayne Krebet from the New York Jets. But what's the better, bolder question, Gustavo?
So for the short term or the long term?
Short term as in right now, people watching now, what is the better, bolder question they need to be asking?
What opportunities exist for us during this crisis? That is the better, bolder question outside of our current framework, outside of our current business model, because the business model that you have is for the old normal, and the old normal is dead. Welcome to the new normal. So what opportunities exist? Look, I've seen distillers stop making their spirit of choice and start making alcohol for hand sanitizer. I've seen a pool cover manufacturer stop making pool covers and start making surgical masks. What are the opportunities that exist for us that we haven't thought about? Who are the strategic partners that are now open to us that we didn't have before? More immediately, if you think that you are going to be busy, 30 days ago, before this pandemic, there was a war for talent on both sides of our border, both Canada and the United States. There was a war for talent going on. There are companies that have contracted and withdrawn from the marketplace. They have cut down to hoard cash. There's a lot of talent on the sideline right now. So if you are busy, there are opportunities for you to hire some exceedingly talented people who were not available 30 days ago. These are, I think, all bigger, bolder questions. How can you take advantage? How can you use this crisis as an opportunity to what I could talk about is filling the white space that other companies leave by contracting away from the marketplace?
That is fantastic advice. And Dr. Gustavo Grodnicki, we thank him so much for joining us all the way from Denver in the shadows of the Rocky Mountains. But I think his metaphor about the jungle, it's a jungle out there, baby. Guns N' Roses, welcome to the jungle. It was an appetite for destruction. And carve your own path. If you were dropped into the middle of a jungle, the true entrepreneur, the true business leader is going to find a way to use a machete, use anything to find a way back home, to find a way to somehow create new business models and new initiatives that was never even thought before these exceptional circumstances happened upon us. So again, we thank Dr. Gustavo for stopping by. And again, we encourage all of you to find new ways to lead together and emerge stronger through the course of these historic times.
Pleasure to be with you, Gare. Thank you.